for the very qualities we render impossible. We laugh at honor, integrity, and truth, and are shocked when we find traitors in our midst. We remove the organ and demand the function. We castrate and then bid the geldings be fruitful.
The movies and stories we love are gateways to see ourselves and God in new ways. We discover something essential about our hearts on the journey to understand our own story.
Every great story borrows its power from a larger story, the story that's written on our hearts and woven into the fabric of our very being.
Something inside has been awakened. I can no longer be who I was before. But if I am no longer who I was, who am I to be?
Coming up, we visit the 80s. East versus West, heart of the Cold War, talking robots, and of course, Ivan Drago. I must break you.
He could have stopped the fight. He could have saved his best friend's life. But now, the one thing he can't do is walk away.
He's had one professional fight, and one man is dead.
Baby, he's gonna have to kill me.
You can't win!
Rocky IV, rated PG, now playing. Check newspapers for a theater near you.
Welcome to the Men at the Movies podcast. My name is Paul McDonald, and joining me this week is Britt Mooney. Hey, buddy.
Hey, man. How you doing, man?
Good. I'm going through flashbacks back to the 80s. All they were missing were some leg warmers and some sideways ponytails.
How do you know I don't have those? How do you know?
I see you on video.
I am with you. When I watched the movie last night, I had the album, the LP, the record of the soundtrack, and I listened to this thing all the time. And so I knew the songs, all the words. And so I was just revisiting that time. I saw this movie in the theater. Yeah, I have very vivid memories, and we can talk about that. But yeah, it was definitely a nostalgic moment, and the Cold War stuff that we've come so far away from in our culture. It's kind of like ancient history now, but it was so real to us who grew up in it. Right.
Like you knew where the fallout shelters were because you were literally, hey, this might happen. Or acid rain. That was the big thing back then.
Acid rain.
We were terrified of rain back then because we were sure it's going to eat through our umbrellas and our houses and
Get
the
rid
things
of our
we
hair.
worried about 30 years ago, 40 years ago.
Only in America could they teach children in public school that if there's ever an atomic bomb, you just get under your desk and you'll be okay. Like looking back on it, I'm like, dude, no, you would not have been okay.
Yeah.
I don't. Anyway, so no, it was definitely a nostalgic time and a very interesting time. And so, I loved watching it again. I think we're going to get a lot of good stuff out of it for everybody too.
Yeah, I think so. It was surprising. As we'll talk about the U.S. versus Russia motif, the theme. Weirdly enough, because I wrote down we're going to go back into the 80s angst, which we don't think of the 80s as an angsty time period. But at this time, you still had East and West Germany. You still had East and West Berlin. Our biggest enemy was, or at least in our minds, was Russia. And that came out very, very clearly in this movie.
Yeah. And I find it interesting, the context too. We keep talking about Sylvester Stallone's career. I think it's interesting that he made this movie and made it with the message that he did, because at the same time, he makes a different movie, Rambo 2, which is, a completely Cold War,
rescue the POWs from Vietnam. Also a big theme in the 80s.
Also a big theme in the 80s because, the Vietnam soldiers had been demonized throughout the 70s because of what happened in the 60s and a lot of atrocities that did legitimately happen in Vietnam. But it wasn't all the soldiers that did that, or definitely wasn't all their fault. And so they were demonized a lot. So, when you kind of get this pro defense president and time with Reagan, anyway, it's a very interesting movie to look back on and just kind of remember that time period. There's Reagan, there's the 80s, and there's MTV. Like, there's a lot of that stuff that's all over this movie, but I still think it has one of those messages that we'll get into that's very relevant to today.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be really important that we talk about it.
Almost uncomfortably relevant. Right. As I was watching it, I'm like, oh man, like this is a predominant theme, is this idea of division and divisiveness. And the word you used, which I think is super appropriate, is the demonization of the other. And if you're not familiar with that idea, then congratulations. You've been living a pretty clean life away from the internet and all social media. So
all politics.
Yeah. I don't know how that's possible, but so we talk into the movie, and as the Rocky series has done, they immerse you right back. They provide a very seamless experience of overlapping the movies. In the first 5 minutes, you get Eye of the Tiger. You get the fight against Clubber Lang, and then the rematch with Apollo Creed there, the last 5 to 10 minutes of Rocky 3. So the question that everybody wants to know, who won the rematch?
Who won the they never tell us.
Yeah, we never know, right?
I never know. They can't tell us, man. That would totally ruin it if they told us, right? I mean, like, that's too much information. We have to imagine what that would have been like. Yeah.
Rocky does say at one point, I think it's in Creed, that Apollo won, but that's after, Apollo's gone, and he knows the truth. And it seems, what else is he going to say? He's talking to his, Apollo's son then in Creed.
Yeah.
We jump right in, and Paulie's there. He's got the birthday. He's got a super cool cake with his hat and his cigar, and the spoiled kid spraying whipped cream everywhere. And Paulie's big birthday present, again, sign of the 80s, is this weird mechanically sounding robot that brings out his cake and says, "Make a wish, Paulie." And, it's like the ColecoVision back then, and it's, and that whole, the materialistic mindset of life is good. I wasn't really clear on this. Is Rocky still fighting? Because I thought all along he was going to retire after his fight with Clubber Lang.
Yeah, no, he's retired.
But he still has the belt.
Well, he's still got the belt. Oh, yeah. I mean, they don't take that belt from you. They just give you like a new one. You guys kind of keep that. But no, he's still got the belt, or a version of the belt, at least to some degree. But no, he's retired, and this is kind of trying to call him back out of retirement. And the whole structure of the movie is, what is it going to take to finally get Rocky to fight again? Because that's the whole end of Rocky 3, is he's gotten back to his identity as a fighter, but he doesn't need the show. He doesn't need to win anymore. He doesn't need all that. But what's it going to take? And so they have to take him on this journey to supply him with motivation to get back into the ring. And
the motivation is the opening of the doors to Russian boxing. According to the movie, I didn't actually look up the history of boxing in the world and see if they were actually banned or whatever. But according to the movie, Russia was entering the ring, literally and figuratively, to boxing, and they have this champ, their superhero that's been trained, and it's announced on TV as, hey, we're entering, we want to see, and he wanted to fight Rocky Balboa. He wanted to fight the champ to prove himself. They wanted the major stage to say, here we are. And this whole idea that's going to permeate the movie is that we're better than you on each side. And this first clip I'm going to play, the reporters are interviewing the trainers about what is it about Drago, the big bad guy, right? What is it about Drago that makes him better?
Coach Vince, what does all this do to enhance performance?
If I may answer, it makes a man a better man, a great athlete, a super athlete by harnessing all his strength. Though most of the world is ignorant in body chemistry, we wish to educate your country.
There have been rumors of blood doping and widespread distribution of anabolic steroids in the Soviet Union. Has Drago partaken in any such experiments?
No, Ivan is naturally trained.
Then how do you explain his freakish strength?
Like your Popeye. He ate his spinach every day.
And there's this sense of condescension of the world. The rest of the world doesn't know about body chemistry. They run this test where he punches a meter, some sort of measuring strength, pounds per square inch. It's a big tire gauge. And they say the normal heavyweight hits about 800, and he goes and he hits about 1,800 PSI.
Pounds per square inch. So just if most people watching this are probably old enough to remember, but during the 70s and then the 80s, during the Cold War, like, we didn't go to the Olympics when it was in Russia. Mm-mm. They didn't come to the Olympics when it was in LA or whatever. And
that was 1980, wasn't it? I think
something like that. So there was this sporting competition that was happening, whether it was, basketball or whatever. And the Soviet Union would have, quote unquote, their amateurs that would show up to some of these Olympic events, but they're 80 years old now. They're not, but they're grown men. And of course, our amateurs are college age, athletes. And so there definitely was this competition, and it would happen in the Olympics, and it would happen on the quote unquote amateur stage. And because they're a communist country, they didn't have a professional money making league like we had in America. And so there was a context for this for the people who would watch it in the theater or who would watch it at the time, like, oh, this totally makes sense that there's some sort of conflict over a sport, and that they would want to prove they were better. We would want to prove they were better. And it was the whole Cold War, right? I mean, we would go fight or try to protect and get a country into democracy. And they would, they thought communism was better. And, there was that whole, it was an ideological war more than anything. And so, yeah, you some of the phrases were kind of cheesy, like that. I'm just watching it last night, but that was all in context of what was happening at the time.
As we see throughout the movie too, of this whole mindset. And again, going back to the 80s, that's what it was science has all the answers. He's going to train more efficiently. He's going to train more effectively. And despite what they said, he is shown to be taking steroids and doing the blood doping stuff. And on the other side of things, we see Rocky training in nature, away from everything. And we're going to get to that because that's much, much later in the movie. But the division is set up very quickly. Like, you even see it when Apollo, he's in the pool throwing the tennis balls to his golden retrievers. And when they announce that Russia is entering the ring as a boxing superpower, basically, he wants in. You see his face change and he becomes engaged. And when he brings up this idea of him fighting Drago to Rocky and Adrian, she's asking, what's the purpose? What is worth getting hurt for? Because Apollo has taken this very personally and taken this to heart.
It's very consistent with his character. Our introduction to Apollo Creed's character is, it's 1976. It's the bicentennial. I got to make a spectacle out of this, right? That's his character. That's been his character. And, I was having this conversation the other day, because Brady just wins the Super Bowl with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And he's, 84 years old, or I don't know how old he is now, 40 something. And someone was asking, like, you think he's going to retire? And I said, no, it's very rare for an athlete who's that good to ever retire on their own. You don't get to that level thinking it's time for me to quit. You only get to that level because you never quit, and you think you're better than everybody else. Like you think you have superhuman ability to do things. That's the only way you get to a championship level. You have worked yourself to the point, and your mindset has to be a championship mindset. It can't be losing isn't an option kind of thing. Yeah. So this is all. So I really like that they used that in this movie to kind of propel the story forward, because it's very hard for athletes, and I would say sometimes for us too as men, to transition into a different kind of career, a different kind of fight. We still need to be fighting, and we still need to be protecting, and we still need to be active. But sometimes it's time for us to move into a different phase of life. And that's kind of what the people around Rocky and Apollo keep saying is like, no, this, don't you think you're too old? Like, right. It's kind of time to do something different, isn't it? And Apollo had kind of found a new way of being involved in the fight, like we talked about with Rocky III, as a mentor, as a trainer. Like he could have transitioned, but something in him wanted the spectacle. And it was decent writing, in my opinion, to give him that. And it kind of, as it goes through, it gives Rocky the motivation, because of what happened. He
paints it as this will be great. I was a champ. He doesn't think that this guy's coming out is going to be any good. Yeah. And he thinks he's doing them a favor. And that's how he paints it. That's how he spins it. But you see in certain scenes that he thinks less of them. He thinks less of the Russians, less of their boxers. As we've talked about throughout this whole series on the Rocky movies, it's not about the person in the other corner. It's about the person in your own corner. It's about the person in the mirror. And Rocky basically asks Apollo exactly that thing.
Listen, Stallion. It's crazy how people, man, they just care about you when you're in that ring, and they care about you when you're bleeding. But once you step out that ring, Stallion, it's like your ancient history.
Oh, come on, ain't ancient history,
I don't see anybody asking for autographs, do you? Huh?
By the way, can I ask you something? Well, this fight you're having against the Russian, you think maybe it ain't against him?
If it's not him, Stallion, then who's it against?
But do you think maybe it's like you against you? What do you think?
I think you really are getting brain damage. That's what I think, Stallion.
Yeah, maybe, but really, I'm speaking the truth here, pal.
Are you? Yeah. I don't think I want to hear this, Stallion.
Oh, come on. Hey, Paulo, look. You were a great fighter, no doubt about that. But look, we got to face the facts, too. You don't want to believe it, but maybe the show is over.
And that's easy for you to say. You're still on top. What happens when you're not on top? Then what? Huh? Where do we go, Stallion? Because we sure as hell can't be born again.
No, we can't be born again, but, let's face it, we got to change sometime.
I don't want to change, man. I like who I am.
I like who you are, too, but look at that, You don't want to believe this, but that ain't us up there no more, pal. We can't do that the way we did it before. We're changing. We're like turning into regular people.
Nah, Stallion. Maybe you think you're changing. But you can't change what you really are. And you can forget all this money and stuff you got all around you, man, because it don't change a thing. You and me, we don't even have a choice. See, we're born with a killer instinct that you can't just turn off and on like some radio. We have to be right in the middle of the action because we're the warriors. And without some challenge, without some damn war to fight, then the warrior may as well be dead, Stallion.
And Apollo is wrestling with some stuff. You hit a point where he's like, I don't think I like what you're saying, Stallion.
Yeah. And so there's a couple things going on here that it's not as cut and dry. I was going to say black and white, but there was a black guy and a white guy in the clip. And that sounded a little weird, but it's not as cut and dry as like one's wrong and one's right. Apollo is right that if you're a fighter, you need the next challenge. Yeah. You do need that. But Apollo's pride, which is his fatal flaw, Apollo's pride is keeping him from seeing what that next challenge should be. No matter what it is, whatever it's got to be, Rocky's trying to look at how he's going to have to change and what's going to have to be different as he grows. Whereas Apollo, he's trying to hold on to the show. He's trying to hold on to this thing. And like you said, he's not giving Drago any cred.
Right.
And that's part of what happens with division. And that's part of what has to happen before we can really see other people the way we should, not as enemies, but as actual people, and give them respect as human beings. Is we have to deal with our own pride. We have to deal with our own pride, but before we get to that place where we see other people made in the image of God.
Yeah, and I think that aligns with the attitude of many Christians. Because as he was talking, he's like, it's not like we can't be born again, which I thought was a really clever use of it, because he said, I like who I am. And as we've talked about before, a lot of times we get salvation and restoration and the new life gets equated to forgiveness of sins and a pass to heaven when we die. And that's what Christianity gets equated to. And because it's like, I like who I am. I don't want to change. This is, I don't want to be born again. And as we see, interestingly, right before he goes to fight Drago, he says, I feel born again. But there's a difference between feeling born again and actually being born again. And there's this, and I wish I could remember where the quote comes from. It's basically this concept that we have to get rid of everything that's false in order to make room for the truth. And Jesus said that the very same thing of anyone who wants to find his life must lose it.
Yep.
But this idea that in order to find out who we are created to be, we must give up all that we hold closest and most dear to us. This sense of denying ourselves, that Apollo has never denied himself anything in the movie series. And he doesn't want to. Many churches out there that I've seen kind of make that easy grace. That's what Bonhoeffer calls it, is this cheap grace.
Cheap grace, yeah.
Where, hey, yeah, do whatever you want and God's going to forgive you and you'll be fine. But there's transformation that's involved. Mm-hmm. There's a new life that's involved. There's life in general that's involved, that we become who we were created to be.
Yeah, and part of that is humility. Part of that transformation is humility. Every sin is based on one of two things: pride and fear. Every form of rebellion against God or sin or perversion, it's all based on one of two things: pride or fear. And Jesus and God comes in and teaches us to be humble. When you have a direct encounter with God, like Isaiah did, you don't say, wow, I must be so awesome. What you say is, woe is me. Yeah. I'm a man of unclean lips in a land of, like, it humbles you. How could you not be humbled when you come into contact with the God of all things? The omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient, right? Like how could you, and the amount of love that God shows you, it's not just his power, but it's also mixed in with this extravagant love that is bigger than you ever could conceive, right? There's all of this stuff that humbles us. And so if we're going to be reconciled to others, because we've been given the ministry of reconciliation, that is ours in the spirit. Right? When we are born again and we get the Spirit of God, Jesus, it's his ministry of reconciliation, reconciling all things to the Father. But we can't be reconciled. It's like, if you're reconciled to the Father and I'm reconciled to the Father, guess what? We have to be reconciled too. Like, right? I mean, does that make sense? Like it's not separate from the reconciliation that we have with other humans. What are the two greatest commandments? Love God, love others. right? The second one's just like it. You can't separate my reconciliation with the Father and my reconciliation with others. And that takes humility. And that takes my humility to go, you know what? There might be things I need to admit that I did wrong. There might be things that I need to look at where I have to change. And that's what has to happen in transformation. What's the first thing that an addict has to admit? You know, when they go to AA meetings, like, again, I don't know how I don't totally support calling yourself an addict every day, but there has to be some admission before you get better that this is a problem, right? And it's that denial and pride that keeps people from admitting there's a problem. And so here we have Apollo, and he's got this pride issue, and he wants to be part of the show. No one's asking me for autographs, and he's grieving what he's lost, but he's not excited for the next challenge, whatever it might be. He wants another challenge like he had. And I just think for us as men, especially in the era that we live in, the division hasn't gotten better since the 80s. Like, we haven't become more unified as a country. We haven't become more unified as a people in the world. We've become more divided. And what are we called to do as Christians? But we're called to be different. Right. Have a different message. And so therefore, but that takes humility. It takes humility on my part to go, it's not even about me and my side or my way. It's about God and his way. And he loves the whole world. Like, he loves everybody and gave his son for everybody, whether I agree with them or not. And so anyway, so he's got that pride that means he's not taking the other side seriously. He's not really listening to what they have to say. And that kind of pride goes before his fall, which, by the way, just let me say as an aside, when I listened to the preview, to the trailer, I didn't realize they told everybody in the trailer Apollo was going to die. Like, that wasn't even like a surprise. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But anyway.
Yeah. Big spoiler alert. Apollo dies.
Right. Yeah.
And I think
in the trailer. Yeah.
The death of his best friend. They lived on opposite sides of the country. We're in the 80s, you know. Anyway, we're not picking nits. When you were talking about the idea of division, and that is the theme of this movie, is divisiveness and the demonization of the other side.
Yep.
And we're told throughout the Bible, especially the New Testament, that we're called, like you said, we're called to a different way of acting. We're called to act in love. Paul says in Ephesians, and this is a verse that I've been working very hard to hold on to, but we're not called to stand up for our rights or to fight for our morals. We're called to be kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving one another as God in Christ forgave you.
That's right.
And I think I talked about this at some point, but I said, I have a hard time doing this with my wife, who I love more than anyone in the world. And if I have a hard time with my wife, how am I going to do with everyone else? And the thing that bothers me the most when I watch the news, or I hear people talking about the news, or I go on social media, is I don't see people being kind to one another, much less forgiving one another or being compassionate or tenderhearted. I teach at nursing school. I have a clinical group, and during our post-conference, we talk about different subjects. And one of the subjects that I've tended to teach my students is about this code of ethics. The nursing has a code of ethics. And the first one is you have respect and compassion for everyone. Everyone is due. You are responsible to give care and compassion to everyone that you come in contact with.
Good.
And that means, this was when I first started doing this, it was very recent after the Boston Marathon bombing.
Wow. Yeah.
And the same place that took care of the victims also had to take care of the people who did the bomb. When you've got, you might have a rape victim in one bed and the person who did the rape in another bed. And and we talk about this because we think, oh, being a nurse is easy. I'm in it, all these bright young faces who are there to help people. And you are, but it's not always as easy as you think it will be. Like we think, oh, be kind to one another. Okay, that's easy enough. But it's not just be kind to the people who agree with you,
right,
or who think the same way.
Right.
And it could be about any one of a number of things.
Right.
Everybody has their line in the sand that they say, this is the one. But we're called to kill that part of us. We're called to crucify the false self, that pride, because what we're saying is, I can forgive everything else, but I can't forgive this.
The scripture says, speak the truth in love. And what does that mean? So when we say be kind, we have to admit that we're not saying don't tell the truth. Don't speak what is true, because that is part of who we are as the body of Christ. We are meant to challenge people like Rocky did Apollo and say, hey man, I love you and maybe I'm wrong, but do you think this could be part of it? Like he loved his friend enough to broach a difficult subject. So we are called to speak truth, but what does it mean to speak truth in love? We speak truth in love that we're dignifying the other person. We're not assuming the worst about them, right? If you love someone, you're not assuming the worst in them. You should assume the best in them. That I'm going to tell you the truth, and I'm going to assume that you want what's good. I'm going to assume that you're not evil and just want only evil things, right? I mean, right. And that's kind of, but when we get in these divisive places, whether it's America and the Soviet Union in the 80s, or whether it's Republicans and Democrats in today in 2021 on social media, where all these people want to do is kill babies. Or I don't know that that's true. I'm not saying we shouldn't I'm not saying we shouldn't take a stand on what is morally right, but we have to take a stand on what's morally right without demonizing people made in the image of God. Because Jesus said a lot of things will be forgiven, but here's something that's going to happen is if you say a cuss word, the religious people will come down hard on you. But right. God really doesn't care if you use this word, which was a fool. In the scripture, it was raka, which means you fool. It was just the cuss word version of it. But if you say you fool and you mean it, the religious people may not care, but God cares. God cares what you call other people. God cares how you treat other people, how you pray for other people, what you believe about them. Love believes all things, hopes all things, right? I'm dealing with you hoping that you will repent. I'm not dealing with you thinking you're my enemy. The Bible's very clear. We don't have an enemy in the world. Right. Our enemies aren't of flesh and blood. We have a totally different enemy. And so we're just talking about some very spiritual things here about a cheesy 80s movie about the Cold War. But I think it's something that's very relevant to what we're dealing with, because it can be very personal. Like someone calls you a name or calls your wife a name, like, or whatever, like these divisions can become very personal very quickly.
I wanted to tag on what you said about the raka, you fool, that whole idea. A few weeks ago, I told my wife, I was like, I need to get off the internet, not just social media, but the internet, the news, everything.
The interwebs.
Because what I was,
all of it.
Yeah, all the webs. Because what I found in myself, we had the GameStop thing with Robinhood a few weeks ago, and I found myself, stick it to the man, do this, that's wrong. And I was getting angry. They were voting for something in Congress. And I'm like, wait, that's not right. They shouldn't do that. What are they doing? And then the other side is like, well, how can they support that idea or this person or this idea? It was making me feel contemptuous of the other.
Right.
Of you don't think how I think. So I was pointing my finger at you. And I was like, I don't like that person. I don't believe that's my true self. That's not the true heart God has given me. but I found that I was very tempted to give into that. And, I was laying in bed, we were about to go to sleep. My wife had the TV on, or we were about to go to bed, and I looked at something, and I just got riled up, and we had had a lovely evening together, dinner. And and she was like, that might not be helpful to look at right before you go to bed. And I started thinking, I'm like, it may not just be before I go to bed. It may just be full stop. May not be good for you.
You're totally right. And all I have to say to that is thank God that he doesn't do that with me. Thank God that he doesn't look at the things that I've done. The Bible says I was an object of his wrath. I was doomed in my sin to destruction. Like thank God he didn't fight for his own rights, that he sacrificed himself. That he did the exact opposite of fighting for his rights, that he was so secure in who he was. It doesn't change. He didn't change what was true or right. It just changed how he dealt with me, that he chose to reconcile me through love and sacrifice than war and force.
Right.
And that's my example. That's your example. That's our example as Christians. That was Paul's example. That's Barnabas' example through the New Testament and through the real Christians through history. That's our example. That's how we treat people. And it is rebellion. It is so countercultural to the world to treat people like this. But that's the solution, is to start seeing each other as people, being humble enough to say, I need to change, and maybe you need to change too, but it's not just you, it's us. We're together in this. We need to change together. And the only one who can bring us together in that is Christ.
And he's our example. In Philippians, Paul says, and he said, one, look to Jesus, be like Jesus, who did not consider equality with God something to be grasped. He did not care about his rights. He set them aside in humility.
That's right.
It says, do nothing from selfish conceit or selfish ambition or conceit, but in humility count others as more significant than yourself. Because
that's so good.
That's what Jesus did.
That's so good. Because here's the promise. If you do that, God will raise you up. If you humble yourself,
right,
God will raise you up. But if you try to raise yourself up, God will humble you, because that's reality. Because you're living a lie to raise yourself up. And so God loves you so much, he doesn't want you living a lie. So he will try to humble you, right? But it's when I humble myself that God goes, oh, he's living in reality, so let me make him an example. That's what I want people to know reality, right? It's not about you or me. It's about glorifying the Father and Christ.
I think that's in the Proverbs where it says, God will exalt the humble, but the pride or the mighty he will strike down, or something along those lines.
That's in James too. He gives grace to the humble, but resists the proud. That's in James.
Because it's this whole sense of, we want to be gods. Our heart, we want to set ourselves up as God of our world. And trying to connect this back to the movie, that was Apollo.
Yeah.
He didn't like where he was. He didn't like where his true self was heading. This teaching fighters, being, a great spokesman for boxing and doing the things that he could. He wanted what he had, and it ended up costing him.
Yeah. And it's a fatal flaw.
Even in the fight, don't you dare stop this fight, no matter what.
No matter what. I'm willing to die on this.
Right.
I'm willing to die right here on this identity, on this understanding. I'm willing to just die right here. And so he does. And so he dies because he underestimates his opponent. And how much do we underestimate our opponent spiritually? Oftentimes, like, oh, I'll just do this, and it's not a big deal.
That's just people being. It's pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
And of course, Rocky, for the sake of the story, doesn't stop the fight. And of course, he listens to his friend because, he gets the pride. He gets it. He totally understands the fighter's pride. Rocky understands this. And so he doesn't stop the fight, even though it's such a heartbreaking moment when Duke is like, throw the freaking towel. stop the fight. And his wife is screaming and everybody's like, man, no. And so Rocky has this guilt and he's thinking, well, that's it. Now I have an enemy. Now I've got, and this is the first time, by the way, this is the first of the 4 movies where his training is about his opponent, where his training is, he's at the top of the mountain shouting Drago. This is the first time it's really focused on a person. And that's what has to change in Rocky throughout the movie. That's the thinking that has to change is that this person is the enemy.
And the interesting thing was, while he did have that mindset, at no point did I see any anger or pride coming from Rocky.
That's true.
He had sorrow because Apollo was dead. He went on the what music was playing? There's no easy way out.
There's no easy way out.
The montage of
what a great song.
Memories from the first 3 movies, the good and the bad. And he's going through and reminiscing. But at no time was Rocky, he had no venom or vitriol faced towards the Russians.
Yeah.
Other people did.
Yeah, it was personal. It made it personal because his friend died. So it was personal to him. And he felt guilt, right? So he's being motivated by something bigger in that moment that we all feel like we've messed up and we're guilty of something and we try to make it right. Right. I think I got to make it right, and there's certain honor in that to try to make it right. But he does it in the only way he knows how and now he's not going to have the fatal flaw of not taking Drago seriously. He's going to take him seriously. But something that we talked about, before we started recording that I really love about this movie is that when he decides, maybe we should go back to, do you have the clip of Adrian and that whole conversation where she tells him,
I wanted to hit the press conference.
Oh, okay.
Where they talk about.
Yeah. Let's hit that.
So in this press conference, they're announcing the fight. Rocky says he's not getting paid. Rocky's given up the belt. This is an unsanctioned fight. And it's going to be in Moscow, in Russia, which nobody really understands.
Rocky, what's going on?
Why did you agree to this?
We fight in Soviet Union, and we fight nowhere. Why don't you ask Drago's wife? Why she is afraid? Tell them, please.
I'm afraid for my husband's life. We have threats of violence everywhere. We are not in politics. All I want is for my husband to be safe, to be treated fairly. You call him a killer. He's a professional fighter, not a killer. You have this belief that you are better than us. You have this belief that this country is so very good and we are so very bad. You have this belief that you are so fair and we are so very cruel.
It is all lies and false propaganda to support this antagonistic and violent government.
Oh, violent? Hey, we don't keep our people behind a wall with machine guns.
Who are you?
Who am I? I'm the unsilent majority, big mouth.
Good. Yes, good. Insult us. This more typical rude behavior toward visiting foreigners. But perhaps this simple defeat of this little so-called champion will be a perfect example of how pathetically weak your society has become. We go.
Yeah, that's just further evidence of that divisive mentality. This is what you say about us. You say you're so much better than us, but we're going to prove we're better than you. And it's antagonistic, and it's all the language is about conflict. And if you lived in that time, you totally get what they're saying. I mean, people talk that way. This.
You cheered for Paulie.
You cheered for Paulie. You were like, yeah, that's right.
We are better than you.
We don't put people behind a wall and point guns at them and tell them and oppress them, all this stuff. And
we oppress them differently here.
Yeah, that's right. So all of that to say is it's a great moment. And there's legitimate fears, right? With his wife, I forget her name in the movie. It's Bridget Nielsen. I remember the actress's name. But
Mrs. Drago.
Yeah, Mrs. Drago, who says, I'm afraid for my husband. He's not a killer. He's a fighter. And And you start to see some of that in Drago. I mean, he's got his own kind of anger, but he's also got his own sort of, he's not a great actor, whatever his name was that got the part, but you start to see that a little bit of that sort of thing behind the eyes.
Dolph Lundgren.
That's who it was. Who, by the way, almost didn't get the part because he was too tall. I was reading about that last night.
Well, because Sylvester Stallone's like 5'4" or something.
Like 5'8", maybe, or 5'10". But anyway, but all that to say is it's more of that divisive sort of language. And then of course he does this and then doesn't tell his wife he's doing it,
which was weird.
It was weird.
I mean, it was, and I think it's a sign of the shift. As we've seen, he knows his identity. He is a fighter. He has to fight for what he believes is right, with or without Adrian now.
Yep.
And so she shows up at home, press is there, and she's like, I don't know why you guys are here. Rocky goes out for his driving MTV video and comes back, and they have a conversation that is, if you remember the conversation they had on the beach, this time it seems like they flipped roles.
So where are you going?
They said they're gonna let me train in Russia. I just want to go someplace where I ain't gonna think about nothing except him.
Rocky, give it some time. Don't do this. A lot of people live with hurt.
Adrian, a lot of people don't have a choice. I do.
And for that, you're willing to lose everything?
Adrian, this ain't everything. This house and the cars and all the stuff we got, that ain't everything. It's a lot more than this, Adrian.
Before, there were reasons to fight I could understand, but I don't understand this. Even if you win, what have you won? Apollo's still gone. Why can't you change your thinking? Everybody else does.
Because I'm a fighter. That's the way I'm made, Adrian. That's what you married. We can't change what we are.
Yes, you can.
We can't change anything, Adrian. All we can do is just go with what we are.
You can't go with what you are. Have you read the papers? Do you know what everybody says? It's suicide. You've seen him. You know how strong he is. You can't win.
Adrian. Adrian always tells the truth. No, maybe I can't win. Maybe the only thing I can do is just take everything he's got. But the baby, he's gonna have to kill me. And to kill me, he's gonna have the heart to stand in front of me. And to do that, he's gotta be willing to die himself. I don't know if he's ready to do that. I don't know.
And there's a couple parts. One is I loved, he's like, oh, Adrian, you always speak the truth. Because in every other time, she's calling out the fighter in him. And this time, it's reversed, and he knows he's a fighter. He doesn't know what else he could do. But what I love about this scene and where this is headed is he's like, I'm a fighter. And to a point, he's wrestling with, what do I do with that? How do I bring who I am into this situation in a way that's true and authentic? And he's not doing it by rushing off, getting the next, he's not seeking out the next newest trainer. He's not, going to a state-of-the-art facility. He's going away with those who's closest to him. He's going with Paulie and with Duke, who helped Apollo train. And he's going out in the middle of nowhere. It's going to be, running in the snow, cutting wood, pulling sleds. But he's getting to nature. He's getting to quiet. He's getting away from all the noise. And as followers of Christ, that's what we need to do. Instead of reacting and responding and getting louder, I think it'd be really good for us every once in a while, as I spout off on a podcast, it'd be really good to sit back and to be quiet, to get out of the noise, to get out of the the maelstrom, the whirlwind of the world, to figure out, okay, here's who I know I am. Here's who God, because God's told me. How do I bring that in this situation? Because again, he's never had any anger. His character never had any anger towards Drago, which was interesting.
Yeah. Although he does say, I got to go somewhere where all I think about is him. All I'm thinking about is him. So there's a couple of things going on is that yes, she's speaking the truth, but not fully. And he's speaking the truth, but not fully.
Well, he's speaking the truth. She's speaking the truth out of fear.
Out of fear. And he kind of is too, because he says something really important that is untrue. He says, I'm a fighter and we can't change anything. We can't change what we are. And let me tell you, that's not being a fighter. The attitude that I can't change anything is actually not being a fighter. That's a quitter. You see what I mean? Like,
that's right. We used to say in the Army, you can't smoke a quitter. Do more push-ups. No.
Yeah. And so if he says, look, he's just giving in to the situation. He's literally giving in to the situation. He's letting the outside forces control him. And that is the exact opposite of what it means to be a fighter. And he has to learn that. That's what he has to learn by the end of the movie is to say, well, maybe fighting doesn't have to look like me punching somebody in the face. Maybe fighting can look a different way. Maybe fighting can look like me changing what I even think fighting really is. Like, there's all this stuff that's going on. But just as a guy, it's like the lowest of the low to not only is your second best friend. So first there was Mickey in Rocky 3. Now there's Apollo. Not only is he dead, but you feel responsible.
Much like he did for Mickey.
Much like he did for Mickey. He didn't have anybody to blame for Mickey like he does for Drago, right? But not only is this lowest of the low point that he gets, and then his wife, who has for 3 movies believed in him, now his wife says, you can't win.
Yeah.
Which is partly true. Like, this is not how you're going to win. And that's her point. She is right. But again, she's still speaking it out of fear. She's not speaking it in love. She's not doing it in an encouraging way. She's fearful in doing so, but she's saying, look, even if you beat him, you don't win.
Right.
Like all this stuff that's happening, you're like that. There's no winning in that. And so all of that to say is this a great little conversation, and it is kind of a flip flop of the beach, and it's a different sort of idea from the beach, but it really throws him more into darkness. But what I love about this movie is that you see this growth in Rocky. As cheesy as the whole Cold War stuff can be, you start to see this maturity in Rocky where he's the one who decides where he's going to go train. He doesn't need Mickey or Apollo to try to take him back to the beginning or take him back to Hard Knocks. He's going back to Hard Knocks. And like you're saying, as Christians, this is something we have to, it's maturity that a pastor doesn't have to tell me to go back to Hard Knocks. I know that if I'm going to go into battle against the devil or a spiritual enemy, I'm the one who gets to decide now. Maturity is me knowing where I got to go and how to hit the woodshed now, whether it's biblically or Bible reading or prayer or whatever. That's maturity. But it doesn't mean that he doesn't need anybody, because he's not going alone, like you said. It's not that he's going alone. It's just he knows what he needs to do. He doesn't even need to spar. Like, he's like, dude,
you're not going to spar?
I don't even need to spar. What I need is to get back to Hard Knocks and to a woodshedding, literally in a barn. I need to get back to something real. And I've got more to say about training, but go ahead. You have something.
What Rocky said is, I can't change. This is who I am. I can't change. And I do think from a certain perspective, that is true, because we see men out there all the time who struggle with their anger, who struggle with porn, who struggle with food, with work, with accomplishment. They struggle.
Yeah.
And we're in February now, and typically the time that all these New Year's resolutions are starting to fade away, what we see is we can't change on our own. We can't change who we are. And that's what Paul talks about in Romans 7. I do the things I don't want to do. I don't do the things I want to do. What a wretched man am I. But thanks be to God because of Christ, because of the transformational power of no condemnation, and he's come through and changed our lives.
And the power of the Spirit. Who can save me from this reality? Oh, the Spirit can empower me to do what's right. It's basically his argument.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, again, we're not literally here, but Rocky takes the Holy Spirit with him, because I think when he talks with Duke that first night they're in Russia, he has some words for him that I think a lot of times we need the Holy Spirit to say.
Some kind of weather we having up here, huh?
Yeah, it's pretty rough.
But for what you got to do, it's good. Toughen you up.
I guess so.
I know you're gonna have to do almost everything alone up here, but you know I'll be with you.
Yeah, I know.
Apollo was like my son. I raised him. And when he died, part of me died. But now, you're the one. You're the one that's gonna keep his spirit alive. You're the one that's gonna make sure that he didn't die for nothing. Now, you're gonna have to go through hell. Worse than any nightmare that you ever dreamed. But in the end, I know you'll be the one standing.
And there's two pieces of that. One, you're going to go through hell. It's going to be a nightmare. Yeah. Because transformation is. Because that transformation requires us to let go of the things that we hold on to the most, which, by the way, are called idols.
Good.
Yeah, and the idols can be good things. But when they're held above God, when they're held as the end all be all of our identity, of our assurance, of our security, they're idols, and those have to go, and those have to die. But at the end, he's like, I know you'll be the one standing, which God does say. It's like when the evil day has come, that you'll stand.
Yeah. Yeah. Jesus says, in this world, you will have trouble. And he also says, they hated me. Do you think they're not going to hate you? Like, you think you're better than me?
You think you're better than me?
You think the servant is above his master is how he says it. But that was the Britt Mooney version of it. But we are promised trouble. Both the man who built his house on the rock and the other man who built his house on the sand, they both had to deal with the storms. But we have been given a way to have a firm foundation. Rocky. No, a rock. No. I love that scene. And I think it was a very important scene story-wise too, because you had to give Duke an emotional moment, because that whole thing had to affect Duke more than Rocky. I mean, they had more history and they had more connection. So it was a very important moment. It was a very important moment for Rocky. So as he's getting into his training, another thing that I like is that, I don't know how much he did this on purpose, but he went to Moscow to train. And if we're going to start to see other people as individuals and people created in the image of God, then you have to go be with them. Like, you can't just decide they are in your brain. You have to have a relational experience with those people where you see where they live. You see how they live. And Duke is playing chess with the guy, and they're eating dinner with them, and
he turns the cart back up.
He turns the cart back up, and he helps him, and he chops wood for him, and he's moving rocks. Like I know it's kind of a cheesy montage, which was most of the 80s movies
80s
anyway.
Style.
But what they were showing is that part of Rocky's transformation, even though he was focused on beating Drago, he's starting to see these Russians as people. He's starting to see them. They're not so different than me. Maybe they're not so different than you and me. And I think that's a really important point as we deal with how are we going to deal with the divisions in our hearts and in our churches and in our country right now. We have to actually spend time with people not like us and see how they live and pay attention and listen. And I think that's an important part before he gets into the fight at the end, which is, it's such an amazing fight. But so just as a little anecdote, I saw this movie in the theater, and I saw this movie downtown in Atlanta, and a predominantly African-American crowd was in the theater. And dude, we were all, again, this is a whole bunch of African-Americans and me and my family, a bunch of white people. And they were cheering Rocky in the theater. They were standing up and like cursing out Drago. And I was like, why isn't every movie like this? This is amazing. Like, I just have this very vivid memory of this movie. And so, but before we get there, like I said, he's starting on this journey of seeing them as people. And it's also the first fight, by the way, where the crowd isn't on Rocky's side. It's the first hostile crowd. Like, he's always the underdog and everybody's like, oh, it's in Philadelphia or whatever. We love you, Rocky. But they hate him to begin with. And so that kind of leads to his little speech at the end, which we all know Rocky wins, right? He wins the fight.
Well, I think, as we mentioned, I think last time, the whole idea of the arena in Moscow completely changing to chant Rocky's name, it's pretty far-fetched. Because I just think about, as you mentioned, we just did the Super Bowl, and my brother's a Kansas City fan. He went to med school in Kansas City, so he loves the Chiefs. He was not rooting for the Bucks because the Bucks showed how resilient they were, or the offensive line of the Chiefs couldn't block them and stuff. And it was like, oh, I will cheer for the Bucks no, he was mad. He was angry. He was frustrated. Alabama is not going to root for Auburn, no matter how much courage they show.
Yeah. And let me just tell you, I hope we don't lose any listeners over this, but I am an Alabama fan. I was raised in Alabama, and we had to make a choice when I was in the first grade. I didn't realize this was an important choice, but they were like, which one are you, Alabama or Auburn? Because
Talk about divisiveness.
I was living in Montgomery. Like, you had to choose. And so I knew who Bear Bryant was, so I chose Alabama. I mean, it was that simple. And I've been an Alabama fan ever since. But none of my friends who are Georgia fans or Tennessee fans, they might give like some offhanded respect to Saban in Alabama, but they don't love because they get their butts kicked by Alabama. I'm just telling you, my friends are like, when I say Roll Tide on Facebook, they're like, yeah, that's the one thing we don't like about you.
You get a bunch of the bird emojis.
And so all that to say is it's unrealistic, but for the sake of the message of the movie, that Sylvester Stallone was legitimately trying to portray is at the end, he's got that speech like he has at the end of, after the fight, he's got a little moment in the ring. And this time he's making a speech where he says, look, I didn't like you. You didn't like me. And through the course of this thing, we started to see each other differently. And now I realize I didn't think people could change, but now I realize maybe we can. And if you can change and I could change, then everybody can change. And it's, everybody's cheering, and it's cheesy and it's unrealistic. But the message, I think, is again, very relevant to our day. And we've talked a lot about the scriptural aspect of it, but that moment of saying, look, this is what we need, is to start seeing each other as people, and not as enemies. Even though we want to, some people act like our enemy. They betray us. They say awful things. They kill our friends, like in the movie. But all that to say is, I don't want to dismiss that bad things have happened, but as Christians, we are supposed to be different. And we are different. We've been born again different from heaven. And so therefore we have the ability through Christ to reach out and start to see people as different. I don't even know if normal human beings can do this. Let me just say this. I don't know that normal human beings can look at someone who's acting like their enemy and treat them like they're not their enemy. I think it literally takes a supernatural spiritual force like the Holy Spirit and the regeneration of our heart and our spirit to even come close to being able to do that.
I agree. And I mean, that's a pretty easy thing to agree to. But I wanted to go back because right before Rocky goes out to the fight, there was a scene, he's going out there and his face, what I wrote down was he set his face like flint. And I'm like, I think that's a Bible verse.
It is a Bible verse, yeah.
And so I looked it up, and it's from Isaiah 50, and it's talking about Jesus. You were saying it requires a supernatural transformation. And starting in verse 6, it says, I gave my back to those who strike, and my cheeks to those who pull out the beard. I hid not my face from disgrace and spitting. But the Lord God helps me. Therefore I have not been disgraced. Therefore I have set my face like flint, and I know that I shall not be put to shame. He who vindicates me is near. Who will contend with me? Because a lot of times I find I need to defend myself. I need to fight for my rights. I need to fight for my respect. But that's not the model Jesus set forth. That's not what Jesus did. He trusted God to be the judge. He trusted God to advocate for him and be the defender.
Yep.
And the Psalms are full of David and other people crying out to God, Lord, I'm surrounded. My adversaries are around me. You are my refuge and my strength. And when we're faced with this divisiveness, and especially with the demonizing of the other, our temptation is to lash out. It is to increase our volume, to be the unsilent majority, as Paulie said, to try to prove ourselves, to say, no, you're wrong. And if I just yell louder, or I pull more facts and quotes and all this, and it doesn't work. All it does is further divide us. But the only thing that can unite us is for us to increase our union with Christ.
Yeah.
The only thing that can work between us is a deeper realization and understanding and relationship with God.
Yeah. And with one another. And for those people who don't know, a flint is a stone. Like a flint is a stone that strikes a match, right? A flint stone strikes a match. And so when Jesus is saying, I set my face like a flint, we're not going to heal the divisions in this country or in our families or in our communities or wherever these divisions are. It's not going to happen naturally. It's going to take intentional resilience and a firm commitment and reminding ourselves, like when it says, I set my face like a flint, like he's saying it's like a stone. There's a resilience to this. It's not going to happen overnight. You're going to have to overcome, but we have been given the Spirit that overcomes. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times, my pastor used to say, what makes you an overcomer? You overcome. Like, in other words, like you're not going to become an overcomer without a battle to fight, without something to set your face against and say, no, I'm not giving up. And there's some of those lines from the songs that we were laughing about before we started recording, where it was about a warrior doesn't give up and he doesn't have quit within him and all of that sort of stuff. And there's a battle within and all of this stuff in these songs. And that's what it's about. It's about getting up again. And that's such a Rocky theme, right? From movie 1 to Rocky. I just watched Rocky 6, by the way. Rocky 6 and Creed, like you just keep getting up. And that was what broke Drago. Broke Drago was not getting hit, was hitting Rocky as hard as he freaking could. And the guy just kept getting back up.
And everybody kept saying, what is your problem? This guy's weak. He's like, he's not human. He's made of iron.
He's made of iron. Like, who is this dude? And that's what will win in the end. You just keep getting back up. we all fail when we start at things. You're going to suck the first time you do something. I don't care what it is. I tell a story often. I don't know if I've told it to you or on the podcast, but my son was maybe 6 or 7, and we went out to play basketball, or I went out to play basketball, and your son's 6 and he's like, I want to go, Dad. And you're like, okay. And so it's a full-size basketball, and I'm shooting 3-pointers and doing all this stuff. And I give it to my son to try, and he can't even make the rim. Like, he can't even make the rim. And the next thing I noticed, he's over sitting on the side with his head between his knees. I said, "What's wrong, buddy?" And he goes, "I'm losing." And I said, "What do you mean?" Because
that's all wrong. So awful.
I said, "Because you didn't make a basket?" He goes, "Yeah." I said, "No, that's not losing. That's learning. There's a difference." And it just, by the way, that just came out of me. That was not a wisdom I already had. Like, literally, when he said I'm losing, I said, it's not losing, it's learning. And there's something about getting back up. There's something about getting back up. And that's what ends up breaking Drago's motivation, breaking his heart. Like, I can't stop this guy. And I'm telling you, that is what is within us as Christians, that resiliency, that power, because I don't care what country or what power in this world has ever tried to stop Christianity. They have always failed, because they can kill us and but they can't send the body. Don't fear the guy who can kill you. Fear the one that can kill you and send the body to hell. Like, there's a greater power that we're a part of. If God is for us, who can be against us? Like, he who is within you is greater than he that is within the world. Like, this is truth, and we have to rest in it and just keep getting back up. But our resilience to fight has to be for love, has to be for the sake of love.
I want to play this last clip, because what you said, what it takes to get up is heart. And that's what Rocky said was going to, he's like, does he have the heart? Is he willing to die like I'm willing to die? And right before they go out, Paulie gives Rocky a pep talk that, if you've listened to the previous 3 podcasts, you've known Paulie's attitude towards Rocky. And so right before they go out, and I love it, he's like, I know you're a little busy right now, but I just got to say this to you.
I know you're kind of busy just now, but I want to tell you some things I never told you. I know sometimes I act stupid and I say stupid things, but you kept me around, and other people would have said, drop that bum. You give me respect. It's hard for me to say these kind of things because that ain't my way. But if I could just unzip myself and step out and be someone else, I want to be you. You're real hot, Rock.
Thanks, boy.
Now blast this guy's teeth out.
That's right.
Paulie's still going to be Paulie.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you noticed, but you hear the heartbeat. There's a dunk, dunk.
Yeah.
Dunk, dunk. And Paulie has spent his whole time sort of putting Rocky as other, blaming Rocky for the reason that his life sucked.
Or Adrian.
Right.
Blaming others, generally.
Blaming others. And he sees Rocky and he sees who he has become. And he said the same thing. Rocky had plenty of opportunity to alienate himself from Paulie. Paulie was not a likable person. He wasn't really encouraging. He wasn't really, he's a little abusive, a little bit of a drinking problem. But at the same time, he kept pursuing him. Rocky kept being there. He always forgave him. He always welcomed him home. He gave him a job. He was always willing to be there. And I think Rocky, especially in this movie, other than in the ring, he has shown that humility of Christ, that forgiveness of Christ, of forgiving those who came against him, forgiving those who, in Paulie's case, he threw, the last movie, he threw a liquor bottle through the pinball machine and he had to bail him out of prison, and he blamed Rocky. And very similar, while we were yet sinners, while we were enemies of God, while we were throwing liquor bottles in God's pinball machine, Jesus still came to pursue us and set us free and to bring us home. And that's the only hope that we have for transformation, for freedom, for heart, is to walk more closely with Christ.
Amen. Yeah, I think that's it. It's to have that humility, to be careful, to watch out for pride and fear. They will kill us. Pride and fear will destroy us. And we have to watch out for that. Just like we unfortunately didn't get that much into, Adrian finally does come, and by the way, there's a whole nother little scene, which is a little opposite of the beach. Now it's in the snow, all of that. But there's that pride and fear. That's not really the truth. There's a little bit of truth in there, but it's not really the full truth. And they have to come to that truth at the end of the movie, where everyone is back to unity. You can't have unity apart from truth. You can't have unity apart from truth. And that's why it has to be Jesus. It can't be my truth or your truth. There has to be something transcendent above both of us, because now we can be united about something that's above us, that's transcendent. But if we can't get there, if it's my truth against your truth, then we'll have two guys trying to kill each other like they did in the movie.
Right.
And so just getting back to that realization that there is one love, there is a kingdom that we all desire, and it's available to those if we will humble ourselves and submit to it. And then we'll have that reconciliation with each other and with God. And it's all part of the same promise. So I think if we get back to that, and we can really make a difference. Oh, and I said this over the weekend. Actually, last night, someone was talking to me about how upset they were about a lot of things that are going on in our world. And I said, dude, you realize this is all an opportunity for the gospel, right? Like, there's been hard times in every decade that I've been around, right? The people who thought the world was going to end tomorrow, whether it was nuclear war or the angst of the Ecclesiastes of the 90s. That's what I call the 90s. And, people thought Bush was going to end the world because he's literally starting wars in the Middle East, right? I mean, you've got those gloom and doom people all over the place, and yet God's sitting down. He's not surprised. And these are opportunities for us to love, and opportunities for us to speak truth that transcends Republican, Democrat. And as you guys have noticed, we haven't given a political side, even while we're talking. There's something bigger that we're both called to, that we're all called to. And so I think that's an important thing.
And our trust isn't in the government or the rulers or even whatever it is that is supposed to be the great next savior and the great next hope. Our hope is in something greater, that God's in control.
Yep.
And we have a kingdom that is unshakable. So when the world around us is shaking, we can offer unshakable. We can offer something firm and,
that's right,
and strong, and walk in faith and love and humility.
Yep.
And going back to that whole idea of being kind to the person in front of you, tenderhearted and compassionate.
Yep.
So we hope that you enjoyed this episode of Rocky IV.
Rocky IV.
Minute the movies, and
if he dies, he dies. We didn't get to say that. My other favorite line, by the way, as a PS, is, "We're not nerds, man," or whatever. "Hey, man, we're not nerds." He's like, "That's my dad." Like they're at his house, and it is a dumb thing to say. "Hey, that's my dad. We're not nerds, man."
But I didn't know why we were watching boxing with the robot babysitter.
Oh, well, great movie.
I love the 90s.
Great movie.
I've spent too much time watching Terminator. Now I was expecting the robot babysitter, Paulie's wife, to go rogue and start killing people.
Yeah, we won't talk about the uncomfortable robot sexy voice. Like, what the heck was that about?
And it turned into a nagging wife by the end. He's like,
yeah, we won't go there.
It's like, what? The 80s, man.
Yeah.
It's just the 80s.
It's just the 80s.
So we hope you join us next time here on the Minute the Movies podcast.